Who is tasked with saving Navy SEALs when they're in trouble? This unenviable task often falls to pararescue jumpers, who climb and dive from insane heights in order to save those in need. These highly trained experts take part in every aspect of the mission and are skilled parachutists, scuba divers, and rock climbers. And they are even Arctic trained in order to access any environment to save a life when they are called to do so. Training is extremely challenging both physically and mentally, but if you graduate and wear the maroon or scarlet beret, you will be one of the most highly trained combat medics in the world, able to handle the most stressful situations with ease. Some even refer to these soldiers as guardian angels because they keep their comrades safe in all situations. The unit traces its lineage to 1943 during the Second World War. A C-46 had failed, and the dozens of airmen it carried had bailed out over the jungles between China and present-day Myanmar. The only route to reach the men was by air, so 2 medical corpsmen parachuted down and stayed with the men for over a month, tending to injuries until they could reach safety. By the Vietnam War, pararescue was an official unit, wearing its signature maroon beret, the color a symbol of its blood sacrifice, and its insignia, an angel cradling an earth. The official motto, "These things we do that others may live." Special Operations is an umbrella term for a number of specialized military units, including the Army Green Berets, Navy SEALs, and Air Force Special Tactics. Because these groups are used for highly risky missions, such as the assassination of Osama bin Laden, these soldiers are often put into extremely dangerous situations. Each Special Operations unit is highly trained in general combat and small unit tactics. Each one can be used for many general Special Operations missions. However, each Special Operations group is primarily trained for specific types of missions. If one wished to attach explosives under the waterline on an enemy ship, for example, Army Rangers would not be the best choice. In this instance, the Special Operations force with the most training and experience in underwater combat operations would be Navy SEALs. On the other hand, if one needed to deploy a highly trained light infantry force well inland behind enemy lines to destroy a significant military target, you can't do much better than a company of Army Rangers. And bear in mind that it is extremely competitive to get into these programs. The competitive standard to be even considered for Navy SEAL training is to swim 500 yards in 10:30, do 79 push-ups, 79 sit-ups, 11 pull-ups, and run 1.5 miles in 10 minutes. This one should not come as a surprise. The Bomb Disposal Unit is tasked with dismantling explosives when they are found in a threatening area. While they are highly trained, there's always a chance the bomb could detonate while they are disarming it. Assigned to some of the most dangerous missions, they perform tactically harrowing and technically demanding tasks in diverse environments worldwide. A job for the best and bravest. They do what needs to be done to keep others safe. Job training for an explosive ordnance disposal specialist requires 10 weeks of basic combat training and 37 weeks of advanced individual training, split between Fort Lee, Virginia and Edgeland Air Force Base, Florida. This unit was developed during World War II because previous wars did not necessitate the dismantling of sophisticated bombs. Before the war, there was no method or organization to deal with undetonated bombs. Since then, the need for this unit has only increased. Unsurprisingly, infantry, or foot soldiers, are the military unit putting themselves on the front line, and therefore into danger's way. Infantry traditionally relies on moving by foot between combats as well, but may also use mounts, military vehicles, or other transport. Infantry make up a large portion of all armed forces in most nations, and typically bear the largest brunt in warfare, as measured by casualties, deprivation, or physical and psychological stress. Originally, job training for infantrymen required 14 weeks of one-station unit training, which included basic combat training and advanced individual training. Part of this time was spent in the classroom and part in the field. But a little more than a year ago, the Army kicked off a pilot program that looked to add 8 weeks to the infantry one-station unit training, all in an effort to make new soldiers more lethal. They're conducting 74 miles of foot marches, and a total of more than 100 foot miles marched in the course. Each trainee has fired 2,475 live rounds by the program's end. That's compared to 1,355 under the 14-week model, according to a report released by the U.S. Army. Did you know the Army still has cavalry? The soldiers of the U.S. Army have a different type of cavalry than in the old days. Obviously, cavalry used to ride on horseback, but these days things have changed dramatically. They now have mechanized cavalry, made up of tanks, armored personnel carriers, and Humvees. Beginning with traditional strengths, Army cavalry have historically combined mobility, protection, and firepower to allow both stealthy and forceful maneuvers. While Scouts have achieved success in recent decades utilizing M3 cavalry fighting vehicles, Stryker Reese vehicles, and Humvees, they have likewise benefited from organic integration of M1 Abrams tanks and Stryker mobile gun systems. Job training for a cavalry scout requires 16 weeks of one-station unit training. Some of it takes place in the classroom, but most of it will be spent on the field. Whether it's taking part in squad maneuvers, target practice, or war games, cavalry scouts are constantly refining their skills to keep themselves sharp. Though they have the benefit of an armored vehicle to protect them, these vehicles are often targets, thus putting cavalry in a dangerous situation. In civilian life, the term engineer might conjure up some sort of math-oriented, pencil-pushing type who frets over numbers and angles for a living. But in the Army, not all engineers are sitting at desks. With the motto of ubique, meaning everywhere, military engineering is a varied and exciting trade. It includes bridge building, small boat handling, and explosives handling, among many other skills. Put simply, a combat engineer is a jack of all trades who can be called on at any point to do numerous tasks. Combat engineers can wield a chainsaw, build a bridge, clear a minefield, build a road or airfield, and use explosives to demolish a target. Combat engineers also conduct basic construction tasks and purify water. Job training for combat engineers requires 14 weeks of one-station unit training, which includes basic combat training and advanced individual training. Part of this time is spent in the classroom and part of the field with on-the-job instructions. While this combat position is technically closed to women, some have actually been able to train as combat engineers for years at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri. By 2013, 55 women had graduated. Artillery soldiers go through the same basic training as everyone else, but they have a very specialized training afterward to help them gain a specific skill set. The operation of an artillery howitzer is a complex task that requires several components that need to be integrated. The crew of the howitzer usually does not see the enemy position on which they are executing artillery fire. The artillery pieces are organized in batteries that are located deep behind infantry positions. Forward observers are the ones who actually visualize the target and relay target coordinates to a fire control center, which transforms the data and computes gun parameters that are introduced by artillery crew members into howitzer settings. Some artillery officers spend a lot of time in field training exercises, where they work, eat, and sleep outdoors and in tents. Others live and work aboard ships. Artillery and missile officers may work in locations such as underground launch command centers or submarines. This means they are often in exposed or uncomfortable situations, which makes it hard to defend themselves, especially when the enemy is usually not visible. You've probably heard the term medic on TV or at the movies. Something terrible happens on the battlefield, and as smoke begins to clear and the troops retaliate, you hear soldiers calling medic while standing over the wounded. But what is an Army medic, and what does he or she do? You might assume that the medic in Army medic is simply shorthand for a doctor or nurse, part of the medical staff. But medic is actually an official job within the U.S. Army with a specialty listing. A medic is not a nurse or a physician, but a healthcare specialist trained to give basic medical treatment and take care of soldiers in emergency situations. Although there are similarities, Army combat medic training and civilian medic training are two different things. The main difference between EMT training and Army medic training is that Army medics are trained to provide medical assistance in combat situations and can do trauma care that is beyond the scope of a civilian medic. Job training for a combat medic specialist requires 10 weeks of basic combat training and 16 weeks of advanced individual training, including inpatient care. Transportation soldiers keep the Army moving. During basic training at the transportation school, soldiers learn how to operate and maintain Army tactical trucks, material handling equipment, and watercraft. The Transportation Corps is responsible for moving supplies, troops, and equipment anywhere on the globe. During war, the Transportation Corps utilizes trucks, boats, and airplanes to provide extremely fast support to the combat teams on the front lines. Transportation officers are experts in the systems, vehicles, and procedures in moving troops and supplies in the Army. Though it may sound cushier than other Army jobs, transportation officers are tasked with moving supplies through extremely hazardous areas that often lead to casualties. Pilots are active in both the Air Force and the Navy. Though their job descriptions are similar, naval pilots often take off from aircraft carriers and pursue conflicts over water, whereas Air Force pilots are more often found fighting over dry land. But their missions are not always violent. Military pilots perform a variety of duties and may, for example, transport military cargo and passengers. They may conduct reconnaissance missions, where high-flying, photographically equipped aircraft are used. They could be involved in aerial combat, where fighter aircraft are used as weapons platforms. Fighter pilots, on the other hand, undergo specialized training in aerial warfare and dogfighting, close-range aerial combat. A fighter pilot with at least 5 air-to-air kills becomes known as an ace. Many others are not so lucky and perish in the line of duty. Fighter pilots are one of the most highly regarded and desirable positions of any Air Force. Selection processes only accept the elite out of all the potential candidates. An individual who possesses an exceptional academic record, physical fitness, healthy well-being, and a strong mental drive will have a higher chance of being selected for pilot training. Candidates are also expected to exhibit strong leadership and teamwork abilities. As such, in nearly all Air Forces, fighter pilots, as are pilots of most other aircraft, are commissioned officers. An artillery observer is a person who watches the effects of artillery fire, adjusts the center of impact of that fire onto a target, and reports the results to the firing agency. After completion of basic combat training, enlisted soldiers attend a 10-week course on the fundamentals of call-for-fire techniques, as well as general fieldcraft and small unit tactics at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Observers must be able to work independently for long periods of time, and because the clandestine nature of their work and their frequent placement on or behind enemy lines, the ability to operate with minimal support is of great importance, as some missions can often last for days or weeks. Obviously, this job is extremely hazardous because it requires the forward observers to sneak behind enemy lines and determine the extent of damage to the enemy's resources. As a result, many brave artillery observers lose their lives in the line of service.